Доброго дня.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, dear audience of today's webinar. That's the second webinar out of the series dedicated to local elections 2020, jointly organized by the Council of Europe project in Ukraine on supporting transparency, inclusivity and fairness of election practices in Ukraine and NGO platform of human rights. My name is Alexander Burmagin, Executive Director of this NGO, who is going to moderate today's event. As speakers today, we have Pavlo Lyub,
Член Центральної виборчої комісії.
member of the Central Election Commission, the Doctor of Law Professor, and Pavlo Romaniuk, advisor on the legal issues of NGO Fora. Previous webinar was dedicated to the calendar of election process, the new scenes of the election code, and all these conflicts that might crop up due to pandemic.
Доступний на каналах YouTube виборчих проєктів.
So the webinar is recorded, and please follow our announcements, and the first webinar has been recorded, you can access it. Today's webinar is going to be dedicated to the election commissions and state authorities that are in charge of administering elections and holding elections. Similarly, traditionally, I invite all of you to be active, and we are broadcast live. You can access us on YouTube channel and Facebook. You can leave your questions there, and we are sure to answer the questions. So that's the introductory part, and let's move over to the substance of the matter. We'll start with the first scene, that's something that happened today, that's preparatory election process that has been recently launched, and we'll start with discussing the state authorities that were involved in this first stage and where we are now, what were the reforms undertaken, and what was their impact or influence on the election commission's setup, and then we'll talk about hierarchy, powers, and types of election commissions, their mandate, or mandates, and we'll also speak about other state authorities apart from election commissions that are actively engaged in the elections, including the compliance with the law. Let me give the floor to Pavlo Lyubchenko, who will speak about the first stage and the reforms and their influence on the election system and the electoral commission's design. Dear audience, good afternoon. This election campaign has some specificities. We've got the new election code adopted that introduces a new electoral system, and we also see administrative territorial reform happening. That means that elections are conducted on the basis of the new territorial administrative structures, and all of this had its effect on the elections. The amendments to the election code made in 2020 were aimed at improving efficiency of the election process, because the version of the code that existed before didn't allow sufficient time for exercising powers effectively. So to organize efficient electoral process, it was not the CC, but also the territorial commissions and district commissions that were engaged in organizing and conducting elections. That's why we have this kind of broad subject matter for the discussion of today's webinar. In fact, the campaign was launched by the Cabinet of Ministers, who delineated the boundaries of territorial communities and administrative centers of the communities, and based on that decision, the Parliament made the decision to liquidate the old constituencies and shape the new ones, and that did have its influence on the entire process of preparation of the elections. In particular, Ministry of Development of Territorial Communities, though under the election code they were supposed to send it in advance, but given the amendments that were made to the election code later than the specified time frame, they sent to us the list of village, city and town councils and the list of candidates for the position of the leaders in the respective communities. There are a lot of communities that are dissatisfied with the process of amalgamation of the communities, and they are unhappy that the community has one name, but they belong to a different administrative authority. Therefore, we receive a lot of complaints. But the CC at the moment doesn't have powers to introduce any amendments to the decisions and resolutions made by the Ministry and the Cabinet of Ministers, particular with respect to the names. You're saying that there are people that are unhappy. Do we have any suits referred to the court? Did any of the communities went to court? And if there are any cases filed, then what is their status? We have dozens of actions that were filed to administrative court contesting the resolution of the Parliament on the elections, and paragraph 5 of the resolution, where it says that regular elections are not conducted in the territorial communities where the initial or first elections were held. There is a set of actions claiming that the Constitution does not provide for any exceptions. So there is deficiency of the election code that is revealed through that and serves as the ground for the actions. The resolution on appointing the first elections of the towns, the village and settlement communities and their leaders, and there are lots of actions that contest the CEC resolution on impossibility of holding the first elections in Donetsk and Lugansk Oblast. Who files actions, and do you know anything about the dates of hearings? Well, the dates are set on many of them, and that's September 9, 10, September 20 or so. You understand that during the campaigning, it's going to be difficult to change any provisions. These are complex disputes that are time-consuming in terms of adjudication, and we very much hope that it's not going to serve as the hindering element for the campaign and elections. There's a kind of force majeure complication that could be there. Resolution 161 is the one that is contested most often by councillors and members of the parliament, where it stresses that in fact 5 100,000 voters are deprived of the right to vote at the local elections. If you want to stay legally correct, then the CC is the most interested authority in holding these elections, because the elections are set. But impossibility of holding elections in October 2020 has been stated in the respective resolution. Therefore, the CC will have to submit requests to military civil administrations every 6 months to say whether they can be held. So the elections were held there in 2015, so we need to clearly specify criteria for the civil military administration that they are guided by. Well, the most of the arguments in these actions are about the following elements. Last time, both parliamentary and presidential elections were had there. There were no obstacles to holding them then. But this time, the communities cannot exercise their voting rights. So lack of consistency, but not on the part of the CC, because in this case, you act as an executive authority. We are hostages of the legal framework where it states that it is military civil administrations that provide their opinion with respect to the law, and the CC doesn't have any tools to verify this grounds. Though we tried, given the importance of the resolution, and on August 18 we issued another resolution where we requested the Security Service and National Security and Defense Council to specify whether it is possible to hold elections in these communities. But as of August 30, before launching election process, the CC received the response that in these particular communities it is impossible to hold elections as of today. Let's move on then. Apart from that, when it comes to a preparatory stage, the election process sees other stakeholders that participate in the process. That includes NBU with the accounts opening and closing, and the CC approved of the procedure of return and crediting the deposit to the account. So there are a lot of authorities that are involved in the process at this stage. Local governments should actively participate at this stage too, because the premises for the TECs is provided by these authorities. They have to identify the places to see the campaigning materials, put the authorities that administer different registers are actively engaged in the process as well, because as of September 1 they provide information as to the type of elections, whether it's proportionate or majoritarian, and as of September 1 they provide this information. They provide updated information as of September 5, that's the launch of the election process. We need this to identify the deposit. And by the way, the CC is going to establish the amount of the deposit shortly, and this information is going to be available on the CC website. Mass media outlets should calculate the price of the time on air per minute, per second, per the space in printed media. This information should be publicly accessible for all the parties to election process to be aware of that. There is another new thing at this election. Media outlets, unless they publicize this price, are not authorized to have any campaigning materials. So the election code establishes that prior to the beginning of the election process, there is a large number of authorities that are involved in the process. The specificity of the campaign is the following. The TECs, Oblast, Rayon, and city ones, we moved outside the election process, and that required respective meetings for the members of the Commission to take oaths and have the duties clearly established. There are some disadvantages there, because the remuneration of the TECs starts from the day the election process is launched. This period, August 10 until September 5, was kind of free of charge for them. They worked as volunteers. Though this particular period, there were different moments that require payments, for instance, buying stationery, opening accounts, so there were some expenditures. At the previous webinar, we had other representatives of the CC, and there we kept discussing the necessity for the lawmaker, jointly with the CC and NGOs, to think through additional amendments to the election code, because those things that you've outlined today are really weird. The EC is set, and that's a permanent type of a commission, but in our legislation there are some deficiencies with this months of their work that is not covered. In parallel, criminal code states that if remuneration is provided not from the respective funds allocated for that, then they can face criminal liability. So they are taking outside the election process, and observation of the work of TSCs between the elections complicates the work of the NGOs, because they cannot attend the respective meetings of the TSCs. Indeed, we need to introduce amendments further to govern these issues. There are a lot of organizational things that are not covered by respective laws, and they require solutions.
And also I would like to talk about the cities with the rayons, because administratively territorial communities have been established, and the number of communities have been amalgamated with the cities, and then the cities, whether there are rayons inside them. We've got this situation when, for example, in the Kherson City Council has included into the borders of the rayons respective communities, but in accordance with the constitution, the borders of the cities are being defined by the parliament, but in having included the communities into the rayons, the councils have interfered with the competencies of the parliament. They have broadened the borders of the rayons in the city, but it's quite, their logic is quite understandable why they were trying to do it, to subordinate the rayons in the city to the territorial election commissions, which are going to be created, so that all the commissions will bring all the documentation to the relevant rayon commissions. But these changes, which the Parliament was trying to pass at the beginning of September, were not supported. And this was done to address this issue. The Parliament has not supported them, at least according to my information. There was a list of very important technical rules which will address a lot of issues, but there was one political issue which actually blocked the Parliament from supporting this draft law, and this will complicate our work a lot. But nevertheless, as of today, yesterday, the CEC gave an explanation about the acceptance of the references about criminal records, and this is a problem because different CECs are going to TECs are going to differently interpret these issues. Yes, yesterday we interpreted this aspect. I am actually following the process of commenting on the elections, we already know that there are intermediaries who will charge 200 hryvnias or 500 hryvnias to provide these references. And a lot of people, potential candidates, who are going to receive those references. Well, previously, the proportional system was 90 plus, so now it's 10,000 plus. And this is a great number of communities where this electoral system is going to be applied for the candidates who are going to run according to this system. And that's why they will have to provide the relevant references. And apart from the authorities and the bodies, there exist many others. Local governments, local self-governments which are participating in organization of the elections. We are going to discuss them later, but definitely the organizations which are responsible for carrying out the elections, the CEC, which is and this is the commission of the higher level versus all the other commissions, TECs, which are being set up at the oblast level, rayon level, city level, and in the rayons, in the cities, territorial electoral commissions in the villages and the rural areas. They operate constantly, and they are being created not for the electoral process, but they are going to operate on an ongoing basis. And TECs, which have been created in 2015 and which organize the elections previously, they have to be cancelled, dissolved, and at present those which have been created by CEC and by the relevant rayon TECs, and in general, if I'm not mistaken, 1,661 electoral commissions have been created, and in accordance with the new code, the whole structure of TECs has been updated. And this is also due to decentralization processes. Decentralization played the key role in this process of updating, because TECs in 2015 were created in accordance with the old territorial administrative arrangements, but now, because of new territorial communities have been formed, they had to be updated. Quite often the terminology of amalgamated communities is being used, and the first elections, which were appointed by the CEC prior to this year, were carried out in the amalgamated communities, but there was a lot of criticism that there is no such an official term, amalgamated communities, and the legislator gave a definition of territorial community, and now we do not have a term of amalgamated communities. There is only territorial community, and that's it. So the whole system of TECs, and we are going to see it and discuss it, so it's new, it's absolutely new now. And Mr. Pablo, please tell us in a nutshell. I'm talking to a lot of people who are working on the electoral during the local elections, whether it participates directly in organization and carrying out the elections, or is it a mentor kind of which passes the regulations which actually create the framework for these elections? Well, this is central. It's leading. But what is the role during the local elections? The code, the election code, made us responsible to update our regulations in accordance with the new code, and these are hundreds of regulations which were addressing and regulating various issues, ranging of the precinct commissions, about and a number of procedures which have been passed previously. They have been updated, revised, and we had to do it in accordance with the schedule. The amendments have been passed in July, and we had to do some additional work to update all the regulations in accordance with the electoral code. And that's why the CEC at this phase was responsible for creating the legal framework and regulations. Institutional function also was important for us. We were forming the city electoral commissions and rayon commissions, and now this year we had 28 submissions, 28,000 of submissions from the political parties, and it was twice as many in comparison with the previous year. Why it happened so? We have 350 political parties now, and the Ministry of Justice started to work on streamlining this area. So the parties which are not waging proactive, work, do not participate in the elections, and they have to be dissolved. And in 179 electoral districts, there were a lot of candidates who were representing the political parties which were not doing anything at all during the last decade, and all of a sudden started to participate in the election. And that's why the midterm elections in 208 are going to be also remarkable in this respect. They are nominating the candidates at present. So it seems that there are so many submissions, and we have an opportunity to form a good territorial election commissions, but the responsibility for the human resources in these commissions is with the political parties at present only. And can we say that the importance, or the price, so to say, of the result of the electoral commission this year is much higher than the results thereof in 2015 after the reform of the territorial administrative reform, and at present the local councils of various levels is much more interesting for the political parties and for the local business people. Yeah, proactiveness is very remarkable because the area has increased, expanded, additional powers, additional authorities have appeared, additional financial resources have appeared, and now there is a very tough political struggle between the political parties to be able to be represented in these communities and to have an impact on the life of these communities. And these are the major factors of this process. I'd like to attract your attention to the following. Well, there were cases of abuse because in the submissions of the political parties there were, like, so to say, dead souls, like 150 dead souls which have submitted their documents, and they were offered as the members of the future TECs, and there were 2,000 submissions have been cancelled due to various reasons, including the previous one. At the previous webinar, we discussed this situation in brief. The documents were submitted even for those people who have passed away, and sometimes they did not even have a consent of the candidate to the CEC. And it's worthwhile mentioning that CEC plays the role of the arbiter. It's the commission of the higher level. They review the complaints from the commissions of the lower level, and it has an impact also on the composition of these commissions through the suspension of the work of certain members, and they even can cancel the commission if they are not abiding by the laws of Ukraine. Yeah, it's absolutely correct. The resolutions of 2 TECs have been cancelled already, which have been formed, which were forming the village commissions, because they did not take into account the quota, mandatory quota of the parliamentary parties, and they were casting votes incorrectly, and that's why control function of the CEC played a role. It's an arbiter, and the controlling functions are with the CEC. Maybe you will comment in the context of control and the role of the arbiter. You as a commission of the higher level can hint the people that you have to strike deals at the local level, otherwise the CEC can take measures. The decision of the Kiev city TEC on the districts, on the circuits, I have read in the Facebook that we have to actually change them because they took a very dubious decision as far as the creation of these circuits are concerned. The status of the Commission is always a question of a discussion, and a lot of theses have been written dedicated to this topic. And we usually, taking different decisions. Either it has to be, the subordination has to be very tough, and the CEC has to influence absolutely everyone, or we have to give certain independence to the TECs because they are being formed by political parties and they have to be independent to a degree and operate within the framework of the law. That's why the Electoral Code has identified the criteria for forming the territorial circuits, in accordance with which it is difficult to see those criteria clearly, and TECs, to their own discretion, identify these circuits, and the changes which have been offered, and amendments which have been offered, were meant to address this issue and regulate it, but we can see that within one rayon, the circuit, the constituency has been formed for 10,000 electors and 150,000 electors. They are not balanced, and this is actually the violation of the right of the candidates who are going to run for for this or that constituency. And at present, on the 6th of September, the term for setting up the territorial constituencies has expired. We are going to evaluate all the documents, and this evaluation has to be carried out now because within these constituencies the candidates are going to be nominated, and during the process of nomination it will be impossible to change the borders of the constituencies because this will destroy the principle of the legitimate expectations. It has to be provided for. And the CEC actually is trying to balance. On the one hand, we have to give an opportunity to implement the authority, which is spelled out by the election code by the TECs, but on the other hand, when there is a violation of the rights of the electors or other subjects of the election process, definitely we have to respond to it. And I gave you an example thereof, and some of the resolutions have been cancelled already. But the major load is going to be with the TECs. And the first lesson, or the first test, is forming the constituencies. And we can say that they didn't pass it too well. And the public does not give a very high evaluation of the work in the TECs in this respect. And, well, actually the first challenge was creating the TECs of lower level. We have several rural TECs, village TECs, which have been created for the second time because the state register has not registered them as a legal entity, and some TECs of a higher level were passing new resolutions, and now we have dual power, so to say, that there are two TECs with the same composition, which have been created by two resolutions, and the TEC of the higher level takes a decision to cancel its own resolution, and it's outside the authority. But what should be done if the state register has not registered legal entity? Yeah, it's absolutely correct. The Electoral Code had a provision for cancelling these decisions by TECs, but the amendments which were made deprived the TECs of cancelling their decisions if the TEC of the higher level can cancel the decision due to the violation of the norms of the election law. And this problem exists, and each electoral commission is trying to find out how to resolve this issue, not to stop the process, either cancel their own decisions or to take complaints. We get those complaints from the members of the TECs that there are violations, and we have to review these complaints. And we initiate certain decisions to appropriately organize the electoral process, because now it is very quick, and also the terms are not being renewed. And we would like to respond to the comment of our colleague, which was made now, because when the TECs were formed, there were fewer violations in comparison with the number of violations when the constituencies were formed, and it was easier for us to respond to the to the former issues, and it is very difficult to respond to the current issues because we have left very little time left. And now we are facing a very important phase, that is registration of the candidates and of the lists, party slots, and we have to pay attention to the gender balance, and in the single mandate constituencies there should be 30% of the representatives of other gender, and we will have to adhere to these requirements, and the CEC is working on the interpretation and explanations of these aspects so that we will be able to address quite a big number of questions which we get in electronic form and in writing, by correspondence, by mail, to promote to the utmost to the uniform application of this law, because the function of the CEC to ensure the uniformity of application of the law so that various TECs would not apply the law differently, because it will have an adverse impact on the rights of the voters. And
the issue of hierarchy. In fact, it's quite complex, meaning that different TECs on the one hand establish the results of the elections in the respective community. At the same time, they sort of recap, or they tell the results of the elections of the councillors of the oblast and rayon level, and it could be what are the criteria for the correlation between or comparison between different commissions. The next criteria is who shapes the commissions. Basically, the authority that sets them up is the one that they report to. That's something that is not governed by. The example to that, the communities within the boundaries of a city. So who is to set up the commission outside the city? Because the territorial structure is based on the boroughs of the or rayons of the city or town, and they don't expand their powers outside the cities. So there is no law that would clearly establish or governs this issue. So we clearly understand that the CEC is kind of superior with respect to others. There are TECs that are there, but the relations between the TECs within rayon, city, village and settlement, so that's an open question, and we have an expert of NGO. Pavlo, maybe you can add in terms of the variety of opinions as to these relations and how this can be resolved.
Pavlo
said the election code clearly establishes the CEC as the highest and the TEC and its relations to the district commissions at the local elections, and doesn't give the answer to this question, not in a specific article, but in relation to other questions with respect to the TECs that's in the villages, settlement and rayons of the city, the respective city commissions at rayon TECs are superior to them. An alternative perspective, which is subject to discussion because it is not clearly specified in the election code, is the following, that TEC can be higher to others if the issue, the substance under discussion is within the mandate of the higher commission. For instance, Oblast Council, so Oblast TEC is the commission that establishes the outcome of respective elections, could be the commission of higher level with respect to the village TEC that establishes results of the elections if it is elections to the Oblast Council. Our legislation is a very good source of income for the lawyers. And here you see the examples when the law doesn't provide a clear answer to a very important question. And the courts should interpret the law. But there are some practical things, for instance, complaints or appeals. If city TSC violates some provision, can I contest this at the Oblast TSC or Rayon TSC or any actions of this TSC? Can it be contested at the city level? So that's a legal uncertainty whether the village TSC can handle the issues that Oblast TSC that establishes results of the Oblast Council normally does. So, well, as an applicant, as a complainant, I myself should interpret law to figure out the proper TSC that I should go to. So we should be governed by the criteria of establishment. Who established it? Oblast, Rayon, and city ones. The complaints that we receive in terms of inaction or contesting the actions of the heads, when there is some conflict within the commission, all these types of complaints go to us because we established these commissions, and that's why we should respond to any infringements, and we should either terminate the mandate of this commission at an early stage or usually the request is, could you please exercise an influence on the secretary or the head of the commission because he refuses to sign some documents on the boundaries of territorial constituency. You have some other issues that they are on the slide that the village TSC establishes the results at the elections to the Oblast Council. At the same time, Oblast does not establish any type of commission. The commission at the higher level
Це питання воно залишається відкритим і право присутності. Якщо в 2015 році, якщо пригадаєте, хто складав протокол про підсумки голосування з виборів до обласної ради? Районна ТВК. І тоді цілком логічно було, що оскільки районна ТВК складається протокол, то Центральна виборча комісія розгляд, якби зазначили, буде розглядати ці скарги. Наразі, дійсно, і така дискусія. Тому, власне, Ігор Мілянська мережа опори звернулася до Центральної виборчої комісії
requesting the clarification of Article 202 of the Elections Code. As a potential complainant, I understand that it's better to go to court. And the trend is there. It is dominating in Ukraine to refer most of the disputes from respective commissions to court. And there are reasons for that, because TSCs, it's good if they have professional people who can look into the details of the case and make a reasonable decision, but very often it is a politically motivated decision that is made that is not based on respective legislation, and they fall in the decisions made by the TSCs of high level. Anyways, we receive this application just to issue ruling, if you wish. That's why the disputes that are adjudicated by the courts, that would be a very good way out, because that's going to be professional there. We are going to have a separate webinar dedicated to complaints, and we have a 2-hour discussion of the complaints at the level of the Commission and at the level of courts. And as you see, when it comes to the hierarchy of the TSCs, that's the issue that is kind of, interesting to talk. We are talking about the dualism of complaints. And we have different experience, international experience, different approaches in Ukraine when it comes to the concept itself. When you talk about complaints submitted to the Commission, then we can respond more expeditiously. And we quickly respond to all the complaints that we receive. But to reduce the time, we need to reduce the time for the complaints to be submitted within 2 days. That's very short. We have at least 5 days when you talk about the complaints to be submitted to court. Let's move on. Types of the commissions.
класифікуються відповідно за типом виборів, тобто до того органу, до якого обираються. Територіальна виборча комісія, вона як виборча комісія, вона є колегіальним органом, так, уповноваженим організовувати підготовку та проведення відповідних місцевих виборів, як ми вже зазначили, вона є юридичною особою з власними початками, і в порівні, наприклад, коли ми беремо загальнодержавні вибори, то вона є комісією, на відміну від ОВК, саме постійно діючою. Тому тут є певні нюанси. Це пов'язано і в тому числі з виборчими системами, які застосовуються. Наприклад, коли ми говоримо про багатомажоритарку, то цілком зрозуміло, чому потрібно, яку роль відіграє територіальна виборча комісія. Вона організовує проміжні вибори. Ну, власне кажучи, вона не змінилася, ця система від виборів.
No, there are changes. Previously we have a
Я маю на
single
увазі
seat.
система комісії.
At the moment we have
Виборча
multiple
система,
mandates.
безумовно.
Well, no, I mean election system changed, but the system within commission hasn't changed. Between the elections, they are not paid, right? I mean members of the commission. During the elections, they are paid out of the budget. Between elections, the law says that funding should be or can be exercised from local budgets, and this or the other council can either allocate funds or not to allocate funds to keep commissions, and what kind of remuneration is going to be. The situation is uncertain indeed, so this relation should be properly governed too, because if you remember, this issue cropped up due to asset declarations, because TECs, that's public legal entities, and the law on combating corruption says that they are officials, therefore they are subject to submitting their asset declarations, and the head of the TEC, being guided by the law, should submit her asset declaration by April 1 on an annual basis. They are working within a very short period of time. That's when you talk about kind of active employment. They are not on salaries, but the law is so vague on this, and well, I think that's the question about professionalism of the TCs. If it is a professional with legal or any other education, the person who is to do some managerial functions, then if the person stays as part of the commission, then the person can provide some services. Well, Pablo, a few words about funding. Let me conclude or finish. The election code clearly states that anti-corruption law does not cover TSC members, and that put a full stop in the dispute that has been ongoing, because we saw different protocols issued with respect to the TSC members, heads, secretaries as to conflict of interest and other. Since they were held liable for corruption and infringement, they were entered into the register of corrupt officials, and in fact it looked like, okay, the person worked for a week or two in the TEC and turned out to be corrupt official because the person was paid for this job. Well, and the court interpreted it differently. Somebody found no violation. Others brought person to account, and this lack of uniform practice was widespread. So amendments were made. Hopefully that's going to simplify the life of TEC members. Let me stress here that hopefully after election campaign we'll get back to the discussion on the regional and other representative offices, because they can contribute to the efficiency of the TEC. So that's representative offices of the CEC, just explanation to everybody.
виборчий кодекс,
unfortunately, election code
пройшов повз увагою саме роботу ТВК у міжвиборчий період.
The work of the TSCs as to its work between elections. These provisions are lacking, and TSC was trying to govern this issue with the resolution on the document flow number 173.
Рекомендований на першому засіданні
It is recommended that TSC at its meeting should approve the decision on the way it's going to work, on the procedure it's going to work. If that's unpaid type of work, then TSC can
непередбачене чергування і так далі.
once
То тут є
per
певні складнощі,
month.
які мали би бути
There
врегульовані
should be some
на
elements that should
законодавчому
be
рівні.
properly and clearly governed by
Це залежить,
law,
звичайно, від фінансування.
but a lot depends on funding. Let me add that this type of work of the TSC that is not clearly governed results in complaints that we receive where the different candidates that were running under proportionate system and were supposed to become councillors did not receive the mandate and status just because the respective TSCs didn't have any meetings, or if they did, the quorum was missing, and that was an obstacle, and they appealed this, claiming inaction of the TSC. So that's a very important issue. Pavlo. City, rayon, village, rural. Why do we have asterisks when we talk about cities with rayons? Rayons are only in those cities where there is rayon delineation. There are territorial commissions that establish results in the rayons, for instance, in Poltava with the rayons, but in Kharkiv they cannot because they are not there. At the same time, we raise the issue about the lawfulness of establishing the commissions in rayons. If there is no rayon council, then rayon territorial commissions shouldn't be established there. But the election code doesn't leave any space for maneuver, and we are mandated to have a commission if there is rayon delineation administratively in the city. And what kind of results are they going to? So if there is no rayon council, so they will establish results. Okay, so they will calculate votes based on the protocols if that's elections to the city council and elections of the head of the city, and they will issue protocols on tabulation. So, in this city, the precinct commissions send documents to Rayon TSC, and then they send it to the city TSC. You see this movement in this slide. So the main burden is shifted from the city to Rayon. So city level receives the consolidated data and basically verifies the numbers mathematically based on the respective formulas to see if there were any infringement there. We see the flow of the
три групи дільничих виборчих комісій. Це дільничі виборчі комісії відповідної виборчої дільниці утворені на території села, селища та міста. Такі, значить, залежно від виборів, тут я зауважу, що виборчі документи виборів Верховної Ради РК, обласної ради, районної ради, у територіальному виборчому окрузі та сільської селищної міської ради, вони транспортуються до сільської, селищної, міської ТВК.
and
Я вже сьогодні
city
згадував, що в
TEC.
2015
I
році,
said that
значить, зокрема,
already that in
виборчі документи з
2015
виборів
the election documents
обласної ради
at the
транспортувалися
elections
до
to the
районної
Oblast
ТВК.
Council
Наразі вони
were
будуть
transferred to
транспортуватися
Rayon
до, скажімо,
TEC.
ТВК нижчого рівня,
So
сільської,
that's lower level anyways.
у містах без
So
районного поділу,
Rayon
скажімо так.
and city
А от
if it
дільничі
is a
виборчі
city
комісії,
without
які вже
rayon
утворені
delineation and
на території міста з районним поділом, тут у нас
if they
буває
are
два
established
випадки, в
in
якому
the city
утворені
with
та не
rayon
утворені
delineation and we have
районні ради, то тут вже
two
залежить.
cases
Тут
with rayon
дільничі виборчі
councils
комісії
and
потрібно
without
буде
rayon
ділитись на дві
councils
групи.
and TECs are divided into two groups
Одна
here.
група
One
буде
group
транспортувати
is going
виборчі
to
документи
transfer all
з
these
виборів обласної та
election
районної ради у
documents
відповідному
if
ТВО
it
до
is rayon
міської
and
територіальної виборчої
oblast councils
комісії,
to city
а протоколи
TEC
про
and the
підрахунок голосів
protocols on
виборців, про те, що я
tabulation
казав, з виборів
if it is
до міської
elections
ради та
to
міського голови
city
до районної в
council
місті ТВК.
and
І це
city
районне
head
в місті ТВК
to
буде складати протокол про
rayon
встановлення
in the city TEC
підсумків
and they would issue protocol on the
про встановлення підсумків голосування.
outcome of voting.
А от останній приклад,
And
тут,
the
в
last
принципі, по суті,
example,
все те саме.
that's the
Єдине,
same
що
with only one
районне в
difference.
місті ТВК в
Rayons
разі утворення
in the city
районної міської
TEC
ради буде ще
in
встановлювати
a
результати
case of
виборів. І вона
the
вже буде
rayons established and
складати
the rayon
протокол про
councils
встановлення
established are
результатів на
going to
підставі
issue protocols
протоколів
based
про
on the
підрахунок
protocols
голосів
on the
виборців.
results of tabulation. To specify. At the previous webinar, we did speak that if it is a DEC, then we should have its members as super persons because they are going to have all ballots with all types of elections that they have there. And Andriy said that they are going to have crash tests to physically try to simulate the situation of counting the votes at large and big polling station to see how much time it's going to take if you have five type of elections at the same polling station. If DEC coped with the task of counting under the procedure, they have to complete all type of calculation. You can't say that something is not finished yet and they took part of the protocols. No, they need to count virtually everything, pack it, and after that they move it over to different TCs, as we see in this slide. One thing to note here, again, including territorial communities within the boundaries of the community with territorial structure. If that's the people outside the city, they cannot elect the councillors to rayon councils and city councils because the latter represent the interests only of the residents of this particular city.
And that's why the territorial commissions should prevent the violations in this respect, because the people who live outside the city in the villages, they should not get the ballots while voting for the councillors of the rayons in the cities. And the situation emerges when the people who live in the rayon of the city have their own representative body, but in the villages, which are close to the cities, have the starostas who are appointed by the local self-government bodies. Yeah, they have the representative body as a city council of the city, to which they have been amalgamated. And let's go back to the previous slide. I'd like to specify the following question. If I understand correctly, this is the first phase, and this is when the ballots have been delivered to the TCs, and then they move to the oblast. And I wanted to refer to the next slide because the TCs in the cities with the rayon divisions have to form two groups. One group is going to go to the rayon in the city of TEC, and they are going to transport the ballots and all the documents in terms of voting for the mayor and the city council. And another group will go to the city TEC. And it's important to remember that this transportation has to be carried out by three representatives, the head or the deputy and two members of the commission. That is, the commission has to have all the managerial composition. The head with the two members have to transport to one TEC all the documents, and the deputy with other two members from different subjects have to transport the documents to a different TEC. And if TEC with the city, with the Rayon division is not going to have a chairman or the head or the deputy, so it will fail because they have to go to one commission, then go back, and then go to another commission. And I have another question, Pablo. If they have traveled to different TECs, but one of the TECs says, oh no, there are some errors, go back and repeat the procedure. So the second group also has to go back because they have to work collegially. Yeah, the matter is that the amendments to the electoral code, which had to be passed in September and they have not been passed, were directed at addressing the situation, so the TEC is not being divided, and that doesn't bring the documents to different commissions, because that makes life complicated. But you remember that we have small precincts up to 200 where there should be very small number of members of the TEC, of the district commission, and they will not have 3 people who will be able to transport the relevant documents to different places. So there are 3 questions, and we will learn what to do from the practical experience. And as far as the crash tests are concerned, the modeling simulations, this situation with the polling actually raised a lot of questions in the society, because there is a huge workload on the commissions. And if we are going to add the polling, this workload is going to be increased. And that's why there are a lot of discussions to what extent this is expedient to carry out polling simultaneously with the elections. And actually the Parliament is blocking this idea at present. But tell a few words, please, about the following. If there are several transportations of the documents, are there 2 phases everywhere, or it could be done in one phase, not only the ballot but also the documents? When we are talking about the TEC who are moving forward, well, for example, from TEC the documents were brought. Yeah, we've mentioned that there is a chain, DEC, Rayon TEC, and City TEC as far as the city elections are concerned. And also there are other chains as well, from 2 phases, to Oblast Council, and in certain elections, types of elections, they might tally the votes, and there will be only village TEC and the city TEC. We have to look at the parallel transportation. 2 groups are transporting, and also, and after the documents, election documents have been delivered to the interim TEC, and these are those who establish the protocols on the results of the voting. So we have to say that this interim TEC is Rayon in the city, depending on the election system is being used, depending on the number of voters who reside in this relevant city. They either draw the protocol on the results of the elections of the councillors of the city council, or the results of the election of the councillors in the multi-mandate constituencies, and also the protocols on the election of the mayors. And we are talking about the village and city commissions. They are interim on the elections, during the elections to the Oblast Council and the Rayon Council, and the city TEC in the cities where the number of the electors is 10,000, they draw protocols. And in some cases, we draw two protocols on the results of the voting.
От ви
Example,
бачите, міська
you can
ТВК,
see the city TEC,
вона є ТВК, яка
which
встановлює
is the
результати
TEC, which
виборів
establishes
міської
the
ради, коли ми говоримо
results of the
10
elections of the
тисяч
city
плюс.
council, and we are talking
Вона
about the
має,
cities of 10,000
після того,
plus.
як районні
And after
місті
the
ТВК
rayon in the
склали
cities,
вже
the
протоколи про
TECs
підсумки
have already
голосування.
drawn the protocols on the results of the
Надійшли,
elections
відтранспортували до
and
них, вона
transported
складає
those documents. They
протокол
draw
про
the
підсумки
protocol
голосування
on
по
the
кожному
results of the
територіальному
voting
виборчому
on
округу.
each territorial
Можуть такі
election
випадки,
committee,
коли
because there
так
could be
нарізали
cases.
округи, що вони не
Then
не
the
збігаються за районним поділом. Тобто ТВК
constituencies
збігається за
were
районним поділом,
established
а
so
округи
that
ні.
they do not coincide with
І тут
rayon
якраз з цим і
division.
пов'язано, що
And
міська ТВК,
here the
вона
city
ще один додатковий
TEC
протокол про
has
підсумки
to draw
голосування складає, але
additional
по
protocol
кожному
on the results of the
територіальному
voting
виборчому
on
окрузі.
each
І на
territorial
підставі
electoral
даних цих протоколів вона складає протокол про встановлення результатів.
constituency. And then, this is a too complicated engineering, too convoluted, because they create for themselves the preconditions about the protocol for the results of the election as, but did we do that previously in the same manner? No. These changes are related to the territorial organization. Previously it was simpler, and the TECs were coinciding with the borders of the communities, and it was simple. But now the communities have been consolidated, they become bigger, and the jurisdiction of certain TEC covers certain territory, and there are some areas which are not covered, and that's why we need those protocols to be drawn. Can we go back to the previous slide? The cities with the electors of 10,000 electors, but are there cities where there are fewer electors? Yeah, we can see that. In the information of the CEC as to the number of voters and application of the electoral system on the site of the CEC. You can find this information on all the administrative units on the basis of the register of the voters as of the 1st of August. Yeah, that's interesting. There are villages which have the number of residents, voters of 10,000 plus, and there are cities where they have less than 10,000 voters. Yeah. And here we are talking about the TCs and the results. Well, when we are talking about the village and settlement TCs and in the cities without the rayon divisions, the protocols on the results of voting are being established on the basis on the protocols of the DEC, on the tabulation of the results of the election. And we are looking at the Electoral Code, Article 280, establishing the results on the multi-mandate constituencies, and they establish the results of the voting according to this system. They also cover the rayons TECs, and this draft law should have the amendment should have resolved this issue, but it has not been passed, and this is a technical error. And I'm working on the information and campaigning issues, and in the document to this extent, it's about visiting the prisons, and it has to be organized by the constituency election committees, but they do not exist there, so who is going to organize it? It's a technical aspect. At the local elections, in the military units, those are considered to be those who are not residents of territorial communities, and they don't participate in voting. But the remand, there is a problem of remand. Those who are being incarcerated, there are problems because they don't belong to territorial communities. But the remands, that's a problem because there is this constituency commission. It's a technical aspect, and there should be a different commission. There's another novelty. In the previous In the previous version of the electoral code, the member of the TEC had the right to be present during the nomination. But at present this norm does not exist, and they have to inform the TEC about the results of nomination. But there are a lot of novelties which we are going to discuss on the eve of voting. Let's go back to the commissions. Well, here on the slide you can see that the city TEC establishes the relations of the results of the elections in the cities with the Rayon's divisions on the basis of the protocols of the Rayon commissions, and they establish the results of elections of the councillors of the city councils and the mayors. The Rayon commission in the city, it establishes the results if it has been created, and the Rayon TEC establishes the results of elections to the Rayon council, and the Oblast TEC establishes the results of voting for the elections of the Oblast council deputies.
Ну і тут ми можемо вже
And here,
Павло Миколайович
Pavlo
згадував
mentioned already
державні органи, які
the
беруть
public
участь в організації
government
виборчого
authorities
процесу.
which participate in the organization of the electoral process.
Місцеві органи виконавчої влади,
There should be executive government authorities, local government authorities, elected authorities, and they have to create appropriate conditions for working of the commissions, and even accessibility issues are also important. Andrei Gevko was talking about it during the previous webinar. The local government authorities have to create, accessibility to the places of voting. And here on this slide, part 3 of the Article 153, local government authorities, together with the executive authorities, actually provide the places to exhibit the information about the nominees, and they even have to sign agreements with the municipal companies to establish the places for campaigning and even to clean up the place. And they have to also inform about the places where they're going to set up the points for campaigning. And it is true, they substitute the notions. When we are talking about some advertising structures, they are covered by the requirements of the Article of 153, when, for example, we are establishing the place for campaigning. And if we are establishing the sites, there could be cases that in some of the rayons of the city, it is not allowed to place such stands. And Pavlo, there is an interesting question to the CEC. What the people lodge complaints about is to create appropriate conditions. Appropriate conditions are defined very specifically. How many square meters are to be allocated and provided. And also, we discussed at the previous webinar under the conditions of pandemic, how these appropriate conditions are going to be created, who is going to be obligated to create those, and whether, and how the CEC responds to it if there is, for example, a complaint that these conditions are not appropriate. The local government authorities at present are responsible for it. And the local executive authorities also participate in that. And at present they are providing the TECs with the premises and the requirements which have been approved by the CSC as far as the area is concerned with the number of square meters are not always complied with. We get this information and we actually discuss these issues with the local government authorities and local elected authorities so that and we tell them that they should allocate larger premises, but they say that at present the TECs are not working very proactively at present, but closer to the elections we are going to provide them with the additional space and additional premises so that they will be appropriately organizing the voting. So we are maintaining the ongoing contact with the local authorities to create appropriate conditions, because if on the one hand we are giving certain recommendations on social distancing and also the number of people who can simultaneously visit the premises, but we are not providing the appropriate premises for that, it will be impossible for them to adhere by these recommendations. There is another problem, and the representatives of Opora mentioned that the TECs are provided with the premises and the buildings with limited access for mass media, and some other representatives have no opportunity to have access to it. Yeah, this is a long-term problem. Yeah, then the state security system was not letting those people to get access to the premises. We discussed another issue at the previous webinar about the pandemic, but now I was simulating a different situation. In the green area, in the green zone, for example, there is a requirement that one person should have 5 square meters. In yellow or in orange zone, there should be 20 square meters per person. And during the election process, if during the election process a region is transferred from the yellow to the orange area or zone, we can say that the requirements are going to change. We live in the real world, and we understand that it will be very difficult to find a new premises, and also there will be a need to change the legal address and so on and so forth. So, yeah, and telephone communication and the premises of the commission have to be appropriately equipped, and it is very difficult to change the premises and change the equipment. And there is another subject which we have not been discussed, the international observers. Today we had a meeting of the head and members of the CEC with the representatives of the OSCE who were trying to discuss these issues. To what extent all these issues have been addressed as of today. The issues related to the participation of the international observers. Maybe there should be additional rules formulated in accordance with the quarantine measures. And starting from the next week, the observers, international observers, start to come to Ukraine. There could be other difficult situations, and your colleague said that there should be a resolution of the Cabinet of Ministers or the Ministry of Health related to the organization of the elections during the pandemic. And the Ministry of Health is the leading institution in this respect. But I have a different question about this situation, and whether you will address this question, whether the CEC is going to give some interpretation of such situation, because there are absolutely direct collisions in the law. And this is a very specific example. Kropivnitsky city TEC, they have 16 members and they have 80 square meters area of the commission. But if one person is coming, like observer, for example, or a candidate, a nominee, or it could be a journalist, and the local commission can say that this will be a violation of the anti-epidemic rules and conditions. And this is absolutely correct, because they are liable to they could be criminally liable for violating this rule. Or it could be administratively liable. But are there going to be any interpretation and explanations in this respect? We understand that life and health is very important, but this is the level of the regulation, subsidiary legislation. And the election law does not envisage special requirements as far as the pandemics are concerned. And this is provision of the openness and the transparency of the election.
This issue is to be resolved. We are expected to provide an explanation, but we cannot contradict election code. If the observer has a mandate under the law, then this rights should be exercised when it comes to observance of the elections. And if it is a resolution of the Cabinet of Ministers, well, it cannot limit the rights established by the law. The government cannot do that. Though in theory we can imagine that it is possible, but then this legal act will be found unlawful because it's going to be contrary to the election code. So the CAC develops the draft law so that these issues are governed by law. That's elections amid a pandemic. To avoid any conflicts when on the one hand there is a threat to the health of voters and members of the election commission, on the other hand we need to undertake some measures to take care of crowding and maintain social distancing, etc. So if it is governed by the law, then there's going to be proper solution. If we expect that it is going to be done by some bylaws, then it's going to be taken differently. Some people would believe that, well, let's say lockdown in March is believed to be excessive by some, disproportionate to the threats. Some people believe that, well, it was really very necessary. So not to undermine the legitimacy of the electoral process, we believe that it should be done by law. Hopefully the parliament will support us.
Власне, підтримую колегу і
I,
застерігаю
with my colleague,
органи
and
виконавчої
I
влади
warn
давати
the
будь-які
executive authorities
роз'яснення, так,
against
тим більше
providing
тим же
any
враховувати юридичну
clarification.
позицію
So
Конституційного
we need
суду.
to take
Нещодавно
into
він
account
прийняв
the
рішення,
position of the
що обмеження
Constitutional Court.
податкової умови
It
реалізації
recently
виборчих прав
said
не
that
можуть, я так умовно кажу,
limitation of
виборчих
the
прав,
voting
будь-яких прав,
rights
так, вони не можуть
are
встановлюватись
not
під законними актами.
to be established by bylaws, the rights and duties of citizens. That's section 2 of the Constitution. Another question to
Потрібно
Pavlo.
уточнювати, до якого Павла.
Which Pavlo? Mr. Romaniuk. We spoke about the CCs and TCs, and TCs, and it seems to me that, well, it was straightforward and clear. A little bit about precinct commissions. We said that TCs, they do exist between election times. The lowest level, the precinct commissions. What about them? That's the
органів,
basis.
які
That's
забезпечують
the
організацію
authorities that
проведення
provide
виборів.
for the
Саме від ДВК залежить те, як
organization
будуть
holding the
пораховані
elections. It is the PCs that
виборчі бюлетені. І вже на підставі цього будуть відповідно встановлені підсумки і результати голосування. Поки що, ну, скажімо, до утворення дільничних виборчих комісій, звичайно, залишився десь близько місяця. Але тут потрібно зауважити те, що тут певні складнощі вже вони будуть, звичайно. Вони пов'язані як не тільки з їх формуванням, але вони пов'язані зі складністю все ж таки виконання їх основної функції, це підрахунку голосів виборців. І про це ми вже сказали, що тут потрібно проводити креш-тести і визначати, скільки часу потрібно для підрахунку. Але не підрахунком єдиним, бо і встановити результати потім, особливо за пропорційною системою, буде надзвичайно складно. Але складність для дільничих виборчих комісій все ж таки є те, що вони будуть рахувати за різними типами виборів, і про те, що ви сказали, що багаторівневість цих виборів, безумовно, воно буде.
Sorry for interrupting. The issue of establishing them is very important because when it comes to village and segment TCs, most of the members were selected without casting lots. So we, when it comes to oblast levels, well, the numbers were different. So we had instance when it was just the necessary number of members to set it up. There were only single instances when lottery was organized. When it comes to the pieces, that's the lower level. With their number, there is a lot more of them. Yeah, there are really very many of them. More than 30,000 of PCs. And due to the reduction of the number of voters, the number of polling stations is reducing too. This is the process of an objective nature. The number of people living in rural areas is reducing, and the polling stations with 100 and 150 people have 20-30 people at the moment, and this territory is kind of merged with the polling station adjoining to it. That's facilitating the process of delivering the voters, transporting the voters to the polling station. It's easier and less costly to do rather than set up a separate PSC. Premises is an issue very often while there is no electricity in the building, etc. So there are no people, members of the PSC, and it's very difficult to do that when there is a small number of people living there. So hopefully subjects of the electoral process will be active on that too, and we'll be able to set the PSCs there too, but there are some concerns. When it comes to the heads of the PSCs, they should be courageous people, because there's going to be a new experience for everybody at these elections. We are going to have new ballots, we have new types of protocols, so that's absolutely new process that we have, the new process of counting votes, establishing the outcome at a specific PSC. So the question to both of you, to the representative of the CC and the leading NGO on elections, training, education, do you have any programs, projects on that? Because those people that are going to make PSCs on October 9 won't have a lot of time to study and be trained then. So how do you support these courageous people who are going to follow the system for the first time? The CFC website has some information materials to explain election legislation, manuals for the members of the TSCs, and we are going to have paper copies that everybody will receive. But what you asked about, well, that's the pieces that are going to be established on October 9, and there is really very short time left for their training. And another big issue here is large number of replacement of the members of the commissions. At each of the meetings, basically, we see one or several members replaced. That's a very long-standing, painful issue for Ukraine. Having trained one set of members of the commissions, just on the elections, we could see a lot of replacements, and we see the heads replaced. The question to Fora, sometimes we have the rotation of the full composition happening twice. At the moment, we see this worsening due to the positive test of the members of the Commission. That's the result of the pandemic, and we need to figure out what to do with that. For instance, if at the meeting it was figured out that a member of the Electoral Commission was positively tested with COVID-19, then the entire Commission should be under lockdown, so that would preclude the Commission from its proper work. At the previous webinar we said that the question for political parties, they need to have reserves, because in case of emergency they have to be prepared to replace members. So PCs are going to be at the forefront given the pandemic, because they are going to be in direct contact with the voters.
Тут ще питання, чи можна повторно потім вже, коли здорові члени комісії перехворіли, повторно їх подавати?
So can we submit them as candidates then? So, if somebody falls sick in early October,
щодо навчання та просвітницької кампанії, тут, окрім Центральної виборчої комісії, долучилися як громадські організації вітчизняні, так і міжнародні організації, тому що там Рада Європи, якщо ми знаємо, ряд інфографік розроблено, посібників, плануються інші проекти, так, громадянська мережа опору підписала нещодавно меморандум про співпрацю з Міністерством цифрової трансформації щодо підготовки просвітницького курсу на базі «Дія», в тому числі і для територіальних виборчих комісій, і для дільничих виборчих комісій. Окрім того, навчання відбувається і поліції, активно долучаються до такої просвітницької.
I'm trying to analyze this process, like adoption of the election code, so developing the draft laws. The one draft was registered on the 10th. It was supported by the parliament. So all this procedure leaves the impression that it seems to be that everybody, TCs, PCs, CC, everybody is going to be involved in counting the votes. So counting is going to be the process on election day that it would be challenging for virtually everybody, for all members of the commissions. And I think observers might help as well. Maybe it's not provided for by the election code, but that's going to be a serious challenge for all of us. If previously we could speak about the way the TCs are ready for that based on the experience of 2010 and previous elections, at the moment we are starting from the scratch. We reset it to zero when it comes to experience. We need to acquire this experience. So concerted efforts of the commissions of all levels will allow will allow for the voters to exercise their voting rights. If PCs do everything well, and then you expect them to do all this kind of groundwork, then, well, you might see a lot of issues then. On PCs, would you like to add something? Another important stage that links PCs with the PCs is issuing and transfer of ballots. The time for all that is really short. We have 8 days for the police to take care of security of ballots, and there are some challenges there as well. As to organization of the PCs, I think the heavy burden for them is at the stage of receiving the voters' lists. Well, the voters should know if they are on the list that were made before, and then the voters' lists are referred to the commission to organize the voting, and the PC should notify the voters about the venue and address of the voting. During the start or during the election process, the address cannot be changed. But life proves that, and yesterday, for instance, we made a decision on changing the boundaries of the polling station, because one territorial community was divided between newly established ones, and one polling station that covered 2 villages. It turned out to look like that. One village is in one territorial community and the other is in the different territorial community. And we had to introduce changes to the boundaries of the polling station, so that respective voters would vote for the authority that would represent their interest. Members of the commission should send an invitation within the period 9 days prior to voting day. We used to have 10 days, at the moment that's 9 days to voting. The PSC is in charge of the premises to make sure that it is properly organized with all the boxes and ballots and everything. On voting day, nothing changes. We have a preparatory meeting where the PSC inspects the integrity of stamps, the safe box, the availability of the ballots, and at 8 a.m. the voting starts, and it is terminated at 20 p.m. Given quarantine, we have recommendations issued by the CC where we say that during the prep period and during the voting day, we should have clear-cut recommendations for the PSCs in terms of the powers. Who hands out ballots, who keeps an eye on the boxes, and one member of the PSC should be responsible for making sure that there is no crowding in the station, so the person would physically stay at the entrance and take care of that. What about temperature screening? Okay, so what about that? Well, this suggestion was criticized because you understand that whatever measures are recommended, they should be supported by money. So if you talk about masks or any means, any sanitizers or anything, given large number of PSCs that require lots of funding, and we should be governed by the funds available. And we know that sometimes it is an issue. And logistics is sometimes complex. We need to deliver these to polling stations, and some of them are located in remote places. And the delivery of, for instance, of ballots require this delivery, include the sanitizers, masks, etc. So Ministry of Healthcare should play a crucial role on that. I think maybe jointly with you, but it is Ministry of Healthcare that should develop respective protocols. They are the respective responsible executive authority.
I have quoting the experience of the South Korea and Poland, how they arranged voting. And there is a very good example for Ukraine is the experience of South Korea. And in case, after the screening, they identify the person who is infected. They had a special box for voting. And they did everything possible not to deprive a person from the right to vote. On the one hand, there is the question of security, but on the other hand, there is a constitutional right of an individual, and this is the right of the first generation, the right to be elected and to elect. And the voters and electors and the members of the TECs, after having read our recommendations, started to ask for additional interpretation explanations. If you remember, using the experience of other countries, we envisaged that people who have some features of being infected have to have an opportunity to vote, but they to do it separately in a different area. But if you remember, in the voting areas, we have just a line of boxes which are attached to each other, and to separate one voting box we need an additional resource to do it, which is not available at present at local state administrations, which are safekeeping all these ballot boxes and those cabins and things like that. They are working on providing us the information in which conditions all this equipment is. And the ballot boxes and the cabins, but it seems to be a very simple thing to single out a special cabin, but one needs additional funds to do it, and who is going to provide those funds, and who is going to provide the ballots to this individual. So these should be the members of the Commission who are appropriately protected, so they are not endangered. This is the second webinar when we are talking about the safety aspects. But I think that these are very complex things, and each little thing is very important, and it's a big question. At the previous webinar, we seemingly were discussing a very simple question, the question of ballpoints, and logically people have to bring their own ballpoints, but we remember the previous experience of Ukrainian elections in the middle of the 2000s, when there was a lot of abuse committed with the help of the ballpoints. But we have to resolve these issues. Are we giving this opportunity or not? And if we do provide these opportunities, so if these ballpoints are attached to the ballot boxes, they have to be disinfected. How often? And the pandemic is a very important challenge and a serious challenge to all the commissions, starting from the CEC to the level of DEC. That's why this discussion has to be started much earlier, because we are asking how to provide social distancing in the premises for voting. We have to protract this voting, but we have the time from 8 a.m. to 8 p.m. In South Korea, they added 2 days for voting. There are two categories: those who are voting in the stationary, in the hospitals, and they got the right to vote at the place where they were kept. And the second group and the second category were those who were self-isolated. And for them, they were allocated some time after the voting has been completed at the end of the day, when they were able to come and vote. And this should have been discussed in our situation, and I believe that to change, amend the legislation as far as the time of voting and the mode of voting are not possible to amend, and these issues can affect the number of people participating in the voting. Yeah, because we cannot introduce these amendments because that's time-consuming process. Well, this explanations, interpretation work to explain the voters that they have to self-organize themselves and divide themselves as for time-wise into different groups. And the representatives of the OSCE gave us the examples. They were observing the elections in Serbia, Poland, and other countries, and they were saying to us that the electors were very well self-disciplined in terms of complying with the recommendations which the governments issued. And your example of using own ballpoints, well, definitely everybody came with their own ballpoints and marked the ballot. But as for compliance with the recommendations, anti-epidemic recommendations, well, we have a trend today it's a political culture. It's related to the political culture in the electoral culture. And we discussed it at the previous webinar. Pavlo Romaniuk said that this is a new challenge, and it might affect adversely the number of participants of the elections, especially in the red zones, and there will be high risks and apprehension of the electors, and people will consider it to be dangerous to visit the polling station. and the number of the voters who are going to participate in the elections might directly influence the results of the elections based on the open party lists, because it might might undermine the position of certain of the candidates. And we have to take not only how many electors showed up at the polling stations, but also how many real bulletins how many real ballots have been dropped into the ballot boxes. And that depends a lot on the quality of telling, of the tabulation of the ballots. Well, we started to discuss the government authorities who participated at the beginning of the electoral process and preparation of the electoral process. And Mr. Pavlo Romaniuk, please tell us about other authorities who are participating now in preparation to the elections, and those which are going to participate in the main phases of the electoral process. What are their functions and what are their tasks? Just in a nutshell. Each of these authorities has its own function, separate function. When we are talking about the courts, this is one of the branches of power and government which administer justice. So the courts will affect the fairness of the results of the local elections, and their professionalism is going to be a factor in it. And this is the right to vote for the electors. And up to the 10th September, the electors who live at the places where they are not registered still have an opportunity to change their electoral address to the actual place of residence, both online and they can do it in person when they apply to the register of electors. And the national police, enforcement agencies, prosecutor's office also have a role, and the National Agency for Prevention of Corruption. So they start a proactive phase in terms of responding to the manifestation of the infringement of the electoral law. Well, the early campaigning already has started, and starting from the 15th September, there could be also offenses in terms of campaigning. And, premature campaigning is a very conditional phenomena. Now, this is not campaigning because the electoral process has not started. It's kind of political proactiveness. But we are going to carry out a special webinar as far as the campaigning is concerned, because there are lots of nuances, again, which are brought about by the quality of our legislation. National police is providing not only the security, and I would like to ask a question about the police, and this is going to be one of the very important authorities, government authorities, who are providing legality, security, and various other functions. Do you have any communication with them? Minister Avakin mentioned that he's going to shoot all the offenders of the election law. And there were the amendments to the criminal code, to the code of administrative offenses, and the PORA participated in preparing those legal drafts. Whether you carry out communication with them and what is their attitude, maybe you have information even prior to the beginning of the electoral process. The simplification of the change of the electoral address brought about the situation when in small territorial communities, which are located at the Black Sea shore, there were a lot of proactiveness. There were a number of electors substantially increased, and it was absolutely obvious that it was necessary to respond to this situation, and this abnormal activity was actually described by us in our resolutions, and we applied to the national police, so that the national police would do some prevention work and check whether actually these people reside there, those who are changing their electoral address, whether they reside in these apartments, because sometimes, the 12 or 20 people were registered in a small apartment, and that was a change of address of residence, and there were attempts to change the electoral address in the railway station, for example, get registered at the railway station. So we are responding to these cases. Either we refuse to change the address. If you look at the site, you will find information to that effect, and we always put the information how many voters have applied to change address and how many voters were refused and how many people were using electronic services, because people can fill in different addresses, but all the documents are not properly drawn, and then we refuse in these cases. But if they apply to the registers, the number of refusals is much smaller, and this is quite demonstrative. But as far as the national police is concerned, I would like to underscore that the electoral code requires to announce the number of offenses prior to the day of voting, and then the statistics should be also promulgated after the voting. And the role of national police is very substantial here. Well, actually, we with the help of those, have to augment our legal culture and understanding of the society, which offenses and which abuse is taking place. This example with the abnormal increase of the number of residents in the territorial communities which are going to participate in the elections is very demonstrative. It's quite understandable that this is done in the interest in certain political forces. Are they prepared, as Mr. Manyuk said, to safekeep the documentation? Is national police ready to allocate people for the whole week to safekeep the documents? That's why we offered the amendments that the safekeeping and protection will be carried out for 2 days, but not 8 days, because it's very difficult to provide the human resources to carry out these security measures. We simply would lack the number of personnel to do that. And transportation after the tabulation, when two groups are going to carry, they have to be stewarded by the police officer. Pavlo, can you tell us about it? I'm reading the documents and I can see that Para is communicating with the management of the Ministry of Interior. Could you please tell us, from your point of view, is there certain positive intentions to make the offenders liable? Whether there is a positive attitude to this? Are they sincerely willing to investigate all these cases and make them liable? Well, when we are talking about the law, and police has to do it, but I am talking about enforcement of this legislation, and sometimes it's different. Well, taking into account the elections of 2019, and also looking at the judicial practices and the number of cases filed, and also administrative protocols drawn, we can see that the number of administrative protocols drawn has increased, and they have been done on higher quality basis, and I cannot say that there were too many people who were made liable, and due to the wordings in the criminal code up till 2019. But at present, the new practice is going to be formed, new case law is going to be formed. We have new criminal offenses and administrative offenses, administrative misdemeanors. The election process only started, and this case law is going to be created. But this is a question of discussion, how tough the sanctions have to be. Or maybe we have to use a different approach to Well, actually, the level of sanctions has to be proportional to the danger which is generated by the offenses. Yeah, we are developing the draft law on criminal liability for providing the false information to the register of voters. Like, for example, people are quoting the addresses where they don't reside. Whether this should be criminal responsibility, administrative responsibility. What is the level of the danger for the society? Mr. Manyuk paid attention to it, but I would like to repeat that up till the 10th of September, for the first time, the IDPs and labor migrants who do not have relevant registration in the communities but reside for a long time there and work there and are actual part of these communities, so they, up to the 10th September, can change their electoral address and participate in voting in elections and informing the representative government authorities in the communities where they reside. Mr. Pavlov, going back to you, as for the courts, we discussed the national police, but the courts, the banks, some other government authorities, how they are going to arrange their work and the mode of working during the electoral process. What are particularities? Article 22 does not envisage any other measures and alternative measures for the government authorities and the government bodies of executive authorities during the electoral process, no matter whether it's the day of voting or weekends. They organize their work so that to provide the acceptance of the documents, review of the documents, and the implementation, enforcing of all the rights of the people 24 hours a day. But this is a problem at the level of the local courts. In 2019 we saw that administrative courts of the administrative jurisdiction were carrying out their work more efficiently on the ongoing basis, but with the courts of the first instance, local courts, and especially in those courts where there are very few judges and they cannot administer justice. So there are difficulties in this area. We should not forget that these cases are very special. They should be heard very quickly. And this is very difficult for the judges, especially that the election campaign takes place periodically and the judges have to refresh their knowledge on the eve of each elections. Yes, I know that there is a problem. There are 2,000 judges positions are not filled, and the High Qualification Commission has not completed the selection process of judges, and they have been suspended at the final phase. 300,000 future judges have not been appointed, and this process is not going on. And I know, in accordance with the administrative code, more cases have been transferred to the circuit administrative courts, and the local general courts are going to hear quite a few number of cases. And the decisions of
окружним адміністративним судам за місце
or
знаходження
omission are being heard by the local administrative courts, but the work of the TECs are heard in the local courts, and this is quite logical, as well as the issues which are related to the lists of the electors' vote.
To conclude talking about the courts, there is another question. For 3 or 4 years, we don't have the system of e-courts launched. If it were, that would resolve a lot of issues. Again, given pandemic and COVID, that would make our life better. We tried our best on that, but somehow it didn't work. So a lot of elements of the system are not properly functioning.
Проблема представництва у суді. Якщо ми візьмемо КАС і будемо, хто ж буде представляти ту ж дільничу виборчу комісію, яка не має юридичної особи в суді? Тут є дві опції. За загальними правилами адміністративне судочинство буде здійснювати або керівник керівник суб'єкта владних повноважень, або
head of
дійсно
the
адвокат.
subject of authorities
Тут в
or
цьому проблема.
a
Ну,
lawyer.
і ще можемо
So
дискутувати,
that's
хто
the
керівник,
problem.
бо
The question
керівний
is
склад
who
складається
is
з трьох
heading
осіб.
it, because
Ну, але
the
при цьому
head,
це голова
well,
ДВК.
would mean three persons, but the head of the commission, so because that's the
Тобто
person
це
that is mentioned
важливо.
in the register. But the fact that public authorities and local governments should organize their work in the manner so that all the rights, including the rights to go to court and to contest something, would be provided for 24/7. And to my knowledge, the courts are going to take care of that. So there is the judge on duty, and there is respective procedure to make sure that it is done. A fresh example, the Treasury. Several days ago, just before the weekend, it was necessary to open an account. The CAC requested Treasury to make sure it is done so that TC could open an account, and most of the TCs did have this opportunity. So it was done by the Treasury, and they could open the account quickly.
Що буде однією з проблем при вирішенні таких виборчих спорів буде відсутність судової практики. Перед судами значний виклик, і ми маємо віддавати відлік, проводити, можливо, якісь навчання, додаткові заходи, роз'яснювати їм виборче законодавство, бо нове виборче законодавство, нове, подвійно нове, якщо ми грудень 19-го одне виборче законодавство, вже липень 20-го трішки інше.
In 2020 we have another new legislation, so that the National School of Judges that should take care of that, and the National School of Judges is working hard on that. Jointly with the IFAS, they already organized a series of trainings for the judges for local general courts and for administrative courts. There is another scene and set of challenges that to do with the other central authorities apart from commissions that have their powers and mandates and duties in organizing the election process. And dear colleagues, we enumerated another set of challenges or issues pending at the moment. Hopefully they are taken care of. At least what you've just said about Treasury and about other authorities, hopefully everybody will contribute to the effective elections, and especially it's important about counting of votes. Other state authorities will do their best to make sure that the elections are held, and again, that's one other concern among experts, and maybe you would comment that to conclude our meeting. So due to this challenge, there are some concerns expressed that the elections may not be deemed as held in some communities. That's what we started with, administrative territorial reform and administrative amalgamation of communities that made some of the communities unhappy, and we can hear some instigation not to take part in the elections even on the part of these communities because they were amalgamated. They are not happy that the center is located elsewhere, the title is different, so territorial community is one, administrative center is different. Why would we call representative authority bear the name of the community, not the name of the village, because that was usually the case before. Sometimes two communities amalgamated, they agreed that the council would be called under the name of one community, and the head would be called under the title of the other one, under the name of the other one. That was an agreement. The government changed this rule, and this made people unhappy, and they urge not to participate in the elections, block the work of the electoral commissions. They insist on setting up TCs within these small communities that are not validated by new legislation. They file lots of actions referring to the Constitution to make sure that the elections are held in the communities that used to exist before the changes that
Я не знаю, чи Павло
reformed the
Миколаївич
basis
в
of
курсі, але
voluntary
з цього
amalgamation.
приводу одна із сільрад
One of
Херсонській
the
області прийняла рішення
councils
про
in
проведення
Kherson
місцевого
Oblast,
референдуму.
made
На
the decision
16
to
серпня мав
hold
відбутися
local
референдум. Я, до речі, не знаю,
It
відбувся він
was
чи ні.
to be held on September 16. There were attempts of similar type in Donetsk and Kherson Oblast, but as of today, the law that would govern preparation and holding of a local referendum is missing. That's why all these calls
Але є два
cannot
рішення Верховного суду
be
19-20 року, в якому зазначається, що закон про всеукраїнський та місцевий референдум 91 року є чинним.
Referendum of 1991 is effective. But we have request to the committee who said, wow, there are
Але це не
lots of
предмет нашої
nuances
дискусії
here, but it's
сьогоднішньої.
not the subject matter of today's discussion. That's for the other discussion. So let me just to recap today's discussion, let me just say that the entire system of the electoral commissions that we spoke about today and respective state authorities that have respective powers to make sure that the elections are properly held will cope with the tasks and will have elections in most of the communities on October 25, and the large public will trust the outcome of the process. That's part of the inclusive, transparent process with effective working courts that are to resolve election disputes. Just to recap, to finalize our discussion, just maybe a couple of comments. Given the complexity of the election campaign that we see developing with new electoral system, new territorial administrative structure, and lack of experience of using electoral system, proportionate system with open list, majoritarian with multiple mandates. It is only through joint efforts of the CC, TC, PCs, and all state authorities and local governments, only through our concerted joint efforts we can have proper elections in the country. We can't hope for somebody who allegedly has experience and somebody who allegedly should do this work and others should distance themselves and just wait until it happens. It's unacceptable given the circumstances and situation. Everybody should be involved, and the issue of trust, the role of political parties, NGOs, all that should be in place, and nobody should question the outcome of the elections.
Підтримую колегу, тільки спільними зусиллями громадянського суспільства, органів державної влади та місцевого самоврядування можна досягнути цей рівень, належний рівень довіри, легітимності виборів, законності виборчого процесу. Тому я всіх запрошую долучитися до такої просвітницької кампанії напередодні Дня голосування місцевих виборів, щоб максимально роз'яснити ті новели виборчого законодавства, побажати всім терпіння і максимально зосередитися на тих нормах, в першу чергу парламентарів, які потребують.
Stay healthy, stay well. So today's event is one of the efforts aimed at education, at discussing complex issues, making sure that people are aware of the specificities of new electoral laws and other specificities. Let me thank Pavlo Lyubchenko, CC member, for being with us. He is Doctor of Law Professor. Let me thank Paulo Romaniuk, advisor on legal issues, NGO Opora. Thank you for an interesting professional discussion. And concluded today's event, let me remind you that this series of webinars is going to continue. Please keep an eye on announcements. Tentatively, we are going to have the next webinar on Friday. And next week we'll continue with more webinars. This series of webinars is organized jointly by the Council of Europe project supporting transparency, inclusivity and fairness of electoral practices in Ukraine, Council of Europe in Ukraine, and NGO Human Rights Platform. Keep an eye on announcements. See you soon.
До
Bye.
побачення.